My 96-year-old mother, affectionately known as Poochie, has been hidden from me, my husband, and her friends since December 24th, 2021.
And suddenly I was told that I no longer had any rights to take care of my mother, and she was removed from my apartment against her wishes, against my wishes.
Right now, there are cases of guardianship and conservatorship abuse across our country and right here in the tri-state. There have been instances of abuse, mismanagement of funds, and a lack of court oversight. Now, in 2018, there was an estimate put at the number of adult guardianships in the U.S., 1.3 million of them. And now there's a renewed push to change state laws and reform this system. Joining us right now, Krystal. He's an attorney and an arbitrator with 3 decades of legal experience, and Christine Montanti. She's a guardianship reform advocate, also the daughter of an elder who was declared incapacitated without due process. Now, do remember, we always want to hear from you. For the next half hour, we will answer your questions. You can submit them now under the live stream of this show. If you have a story you want to share, we'll share that with everyone at home as well. You could just put that up on Facebook. All right now there is that push I was telling you about to change the guardianship law. Part of that push coming from Christine, who I know you've been working now for years to free your mom, Karilyn.
That's true. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you for having me on today. Unfortunately, the system is designed to protect the rights and welfare of vulnerable individuals. However, it's a system that's susceptible to abuse by unscrupulous court-appointed guardians, attorneys, and care managers. So unfortunately, when my communication was blocked and I had no access to my mother, I tried to resolve the situation amicably for months and I didn't get anywhere. So I had no other choice but to seek relief in the guardianship court system. And I was appalled and horrified at the injustices and the abuses that are occurring in the system by the same individuals that are entrusted to protect the rights of vulnerable individuals, and they're the ones that are engaging in the abusive behavior.
I know for you, it's your mom, and a lot of the stories that we've heard are parents, but for one woman, her name is Letty Lanzario. She's actually fighting for her son. Let's listen to what she had to say.
My son is being isolated from me. He has deteriorated. He has been over-medicated. My son does not want to live in the group home.
Now, when you hear these stories, Alan, I know we were talking, just personally about, really the emotional and also financial toll that this takes on so many people, Alan.
That's absolutely correct. I mean, Christine has really been through an arduous process, and it was something that you would think on the surface could be relatively, I don't want to use the word simple, but it would be kind of a cut and dry, quick process. And it's really turned into, this drawn out situation where, she's been through the courts and run into a lot of roadblocks. And it's something that, most people would throw up their hands and accept the status quo. That's not Christine. That's not what she's about. But, it's been extremely stressful for her. And, she is to be commended for her will in fighting for her mother. Absolutely.
We actually saw Christine at the state capitol, joined by lawmakers who are now trying to really put into motion something. I know New York State Senator Palumbo was speaking about this. So let's hear from him for a moment.
This is a problem nationwide. Very simple change to the mental hygiene law. What this bill will do is mandate a hearing within 10 days of the application to make a decision regarding visitation. That's all. We're not making an overall decision on the case. That will run its typical course as it would in the courthouse. Unless you can prove by clear and convincing evidence that this person should not see their loved one, they get to see them, and the hearing would be immediate.
Now, Christine, talk to me about the type of difference this will have for people like you.
Okay, so I've been litigating for 4 years, $400,000 it's cost me to litigate, and my mom is still in a constant state of torture, and I'm powerless to save her. So right now, what we're seeing in the court system is the courts are conducting a one-sided hearing where they're not giving that vulnerable individual their due process rights, the rights to appear in front of the judge, the right to be heard, to present their own evidence and testimony. And also family members are being denied their right to be heard in court and to present very relevant evidence as to show why their loved one should not be deemed incapacitated. It's a one-sided hearing, and the hearing is only with the side of the court appointed guardians, attorneys, independent medical examiners, who, by the way, all gain unwarranted familiarity with the judges presiding over the cases because they're in front of the judges every day or weekly, and they are given carte blanche to make any decision for that elder. And unfortunately, the court just rubber stamps that decision, and it could be deeming them incapacitated. It could be blocking entire family members. So with this law would, with the presumption, you'd file a petition. Within 10 days after filing that petition, you have the right to have an evidentiary hearing where both sides can present evidence and testimony, not just the side of the court. And you have the right, your due process rights, your fundamental rights to be heard.
Yeah, let's actually hear from Fred Thiel, another lawmaker I know you're working with. And listen, he's also an attorney, but let's listen to what he had to say about this next move.
When it involves a celebrity, it gets national attention. But how many times does this occur when, somebody isn't nationally known or internationally known, but just happens in day-to-day life?
Yeah, Alan, you think about that, and you have people, say Britney Spears or Wendy Williams, and now Anne Heche, you have what's going on with her son, and those garner headlines, but there's so many families right here in the tri-state that are dealing with this and fighting for the rights of the people that they love, Alan.
Right, and as I said before, not all of these individuals have the resources or really the knowledge to take steps to protect their rights. What's good about Karilyn's law is that it's a very simple mechanism, and it's not as extensive, it's not as expensive, and it gives them that right to be heard because, if you're a celebrity, obviously you've got the resources and you've got the fame to get attention. Unfortunately, other individuals who are victimized by the system, can't do that.
Yeah. All right, let's hear from Brenda Daniel, who is fighting for her mom.
This happy, thriving, and physically fit woman was moved from her home of 40 years without my brother or my knowledge. The house was sold quickly and below market value. My mom was forced to reside in a deadly facility and isolated for over 14 months. All my mom's rights were violated. She was civilly dead.
I mean, when you hear that, it's just heartbreaking, Christine. And I know you've been reaching out to all these different victims and doing your best to really get their stories heard.
Yeah, it is heartbreaking. So after 3 years of litigating, and all my efforts were thwarted by these court-appointed individuals who would, when I questioned their abusive actions, the family was villainized, myself included. So I decided to publish my mom's story last year in the magazine that I write for. And I got national attention. I was contacted by loved ones of victims nationwide, pleading for me to help them. So I'm fortunate that I have these connections in media and public relations because that's my job. So I'm happy to be the voice for all these individuals. I'm currently working in 10 different states right now with family members of victims and speaking to their state legislators to enact similar legislation, such as Karilyn's law, to help them. And I'm also working with their networks locally to get their stories heard, because I applaud Britney Spears for speaking out on her story. Without her speaking out in court, we might not be in this position today. So you're right. Nobody is immune from guardianship abuse, no matter how celebrated or prominent the individual. So we're working together. I'm working with all these individuals you're hearing, and hopefully we can reform guardianship in their states too.
Yeah, one of them I know is Julie Belshi, who really, what she has to say. Listen, everybody, you got to take a listen to this.
Back in 2013, my parents were legally kidnapped from their home on the golf course in Las Vegas, Nevada. They were 76 and 74 years old and fully capable of living their life on their own independently. Guardianship 101 is isolate, over-medicate, steal the estate, defame the family in court, and then cremate.
I mean, you just hear that and you think, my goodness, Alan. And for families, to have to wait months or years for due process.
It's extremely difficult and it's extremely frustrating. And, the problem is, the inherent problem is that people who are placed in a guardianship position really are essentially granted the right to play God over medical and financial decisions. And again, there's oversight, but that oversight is very minimal. And, that's why legislation like Karilyn's law is so essential, just to put a check and balance on a guardianship who might be abusing their authority.
I know Cynthia Misfit agrees with you. Let's listen to her.
Karilyn's law would have prevented them from isolating my mother for as long as they did. She was isolated from us for over 14 months. I would have got an evidentiary hearing within 10 days, and we need that law.
Yeah, I mean, you hear her saying that we need that law, and I know that's something you've been trying to do. You're in New York, your mom is in Florida, and you're flying back and forth.
Yeah, in fact, last year I took 70 trips to Florida just to see my mom. Just to visit with my mom cost me $400,000. This is what's happening in the court system. To this day, we've been asking for an evidentiary hearing for 4 years, and we're being denied that right. So this would cure and remedy that problem and get us into court, stop the isolation of these vulnerable individuals. Because when you isolate, over-medicate, these individuals deteriorate rapidly, both physically and mentally, and they often suffer premature deaths before they're ever freed from the system.
All right, up next, our conversation continues, including the stories that you've decided to share with us. If you go to news12.com right now, you'll find a helpful guide on legal conservatorships in your state, what you need to know. You can submit your questions and comments on Facebook right now.
I had the power of attorney for my mother. I had all the documents that would let me take good care of her, and I was. And suddenly I was told that I no longer had any rights to take care of my mother, and she was removed from my apartment against her wishes, against my wishes.
Welcome back. Today we are talking about controversial guardianship rules and the new moves to get relatives more rights and more access to their loved ones. We do want to hear from you. We're sharing your stories with this as well, so you can head to Facebook right now. We did have people write in about their experiences, and that includes Nicole, whose dad is from New Jersey. And what Nicole wrote into us about that experience was that her father, Salvatore Dina, was a resident of New Jersey for over 40 years. He'd been stripped of his basic human rights. She said, as of right now, she says her husband and her have paid out of pocket $10,000 in the last few months for an aide and a companion for my dad. What is being done is egregious and needs to stop. My dad worked his whole life only to have everything stripped from him. And, Alan, so much of this, unfortunately, is about money.
Yeah, I mean, that is the primary motivating factor. I mean, when you have somebody who's appointed with broad powers to oversee an elder's funds, and keep in mind, a lot of times the person who's appointed as a guardianship really might not even have the expertise to do so. There's always the potential for abuse. And, unfortunately, there are too many horror stories like that.
Absolutely. Tony from New York wrote in, he's watching the show, and he says, it's a disgrace how we treat our seniors in this country. We do not honor them like other countries. I felt this way before today's show. How can this be allowed in this country? Hopefully the attention given will wake all of us up, Christine. And that's exactly what you're hoping for.
Absolutely. Last year I saw that movie, that Netflix film, I Care a Lot, and I was shocked because it was exactly the story of my mother and so many other individuals that have come to me. So basically, without the courts incapacitating the vulnerable individuals, nobody gets paid. The attorneys don't get paid. The guardians don't get paid. Anyone who's working for the court system. So essentially, by incapacitating these vulnerable individuals, that's keeping the court system going. They're paying for everyone. So unfortunately, there's that incentive there. And you don't need any training. You don't need any medical training. If to be a guardian, you don't need any financial training. You could be as young as in your early 20s and suddenly overnight manage a multi-million-dollar portfolio and make life-impacting decisions on vulnerable individuals that could potentially be deadly.
Wow, that's just crazy. All right, let's listen to what Idane wrote into us. She is sharing a similar experience. She's from New York. She said, simply said, Karilyn's law is imperative to our society. We all hopefully will age into our golden years and deserve protection from the system. My personal experience just recently made me realize how vulnerable we are. My mom, being an independent woman, self-sufficient her entire life, almost taken away from me recently. She entered the hospital, had a UTI. It caused delusion and confusion until the infection cleared. Her appointed hospital doctor decided she was schizophrenic, not able to go home to her family. I begged and cried at his mercy to allow me to take my mom home, and the struggle and fear was real, Christine.
It is horrifying. You're horrified. You cannot believe you're living in the United States. And by the way, I have several people from different countries who've come here and they've been placed in guardianships and fled back, and they're appalled because it's not happening in their country. So my mother, unfortunately, while she was paying these court-appointed individuals thousands of dollars, was over-medicated 4 times, suffering disabling symptoms, and she was being denied her right to go to the hospital. It's outrageous. Never before was she ever over-medicated when she was in charge of her own care. So what's going on here?
Right.
The system needs reform.
Yeah, Andrea says that as well. She said this is really happening all over the United States and it needs to end. Susan has a question. She's from New York. She says, who initiates a guardianship placement? A doctor, a nurse, an aide, and who benefits financially? So Christine, I know you've spent a lot of time navigating what are state laws and kind of how this works.
So it's interesting. What you're seeing is towards the end of life of these individuals, it's also happening to children, as we saw with Letty, but you're seeing somebody who sees that, you know, unfortunately there's money there, and it could be a doctor initiating it. We're seeing, for instance, with Letty, she had a flood in her house and she needed respite for her disabled son, so she put him in a different location, and they saw he had a victims award settlement, from what Letty tells me, and he was placed in a guardianship. Somebody initiated an involuntary guardianship. It could be a doctor, it could be an unscrupulous, mentally or morally unfit family member. So it could be any one of these people initiating it. And if there's a lot of money there, that's why we're seeing that they're doing that, because they pay themselves through that money.
Exactly. Larry from Brooklyn is having a similar issue. He says Karilyn's law is critically important to protect those in guardianships as well as their family members. We're hearing from Aldana, who says, my mother, Donata, was murdered in 2020 under a temporary guardianship. None of the 5 children were notified. My mom never needed any guardianship. My mother was 6 months under temporary guardian. It led to her death, and we are just simply heartbroken. Alan, when you hear, you know, the emotion, the stories, it's terrible. And we have Patty from Long Island asking, how do you protect yourself from this? Alan, what kind of protection is out there?
Well, again, unfortunately, and that's really the reason that we need laws like Karilyn's law, is because your recourse is really determined by what resources you have to go into court and protect yourself legally. I mean, Karilyn's law is a very simple mechanism, and that's why it's so important. And one thing that really hasn't been mentioned too much, but I think it's important here, is, you know, the greatest devastation here is what this does to the dignity of the elders involved. I mean, you know, they use their humanity, they use their, you know, personhood, and you know, that's the real tragedy of this entire story.
Absolutely, 100%. All right, coming up next, we are going to have that 2-minute takeaway. I know it's a lot to digest here. We're going to break down what you need to know. Welcome back. Time now for our 2-minute takeaway on guardianship reform. And Christine, I know you wanted to talk about due process.
Right. So what we're seeing is that the courts are taking away your rights without having a full-blown evidentiary hearing, with denying these victims their rights to testify and go into court. So if this is happening to you or your loved one, do not stay silent. Contact your local senators, your local legislators. Go to the media. Go to your local officials like Office of Professional and Public Guardians, and don't stay silent. You really have to reach out and keep the story going.
Absolutely. And Alan, I know you wanted to talk about, the roadblocks that are really out there for people.
Yes, I mean, as Christine was saying during this program, it is very hard for a relative who's been cut off from contact with their loved ones to really get justice the way the court system is designed today. And that is really why a law like Karilyn's law is so vitally important, because it does level the playing field. It does give the relatives a right to the hearing, and the judge has to hear evidence, and this decision should be based on the evidence, not the whims of a guardian or a power of attorney.
All right. Rick from New Jersey also wanted to add in. He says, I'm so confused about how our country is not standing tall for this. Our government, I'm so confused. We're better than this. Way better. So thanks so much for all of you who shared your stories, Christine and Alan, for really adding such a great voice to this conversation. Now, tomorrow we're going to talk about the new push to get your gas prices down and what airlines are saying about the busy holiday travel season. And there's also some tax changes on the way. Could mean more money in your paycheck. We break it all down tomorrow.